and welcome from Naples, Florida. I'm Tony.
And I'm Leona.
This is Tony and Leona Live. Let's go for strike number 3 here. We're just starting out with the live stream. Had some technical difficulties, but thank you for joining us. We got an interesting show today. It's a broad topic.
Important
topic. It's a theme we like to talk about a lot because it's important for today's context. A lot of Catholics in churches and communities and schools, especially in America, seem to be fighting a lot, seem to be more divided than ever. And one of the things we hope to do with this show is bridge the divide between Catholics and Christians in America, shed some of the bipartisan stuff. But Leon, you want to introduce our topic for today?
Yeah, so our broad topic is what it means to be Catholic in the 21st century, which is extremely broad, and we'll touch on a few different aspects of that today. But one of the things we'll talk about is abortion. And for that reason, I want to start by sharing a phone number. It is a national hotline. You can call 24/7, day or night, and they will connect you. An actual person will answer. They will connect you to resources in your area, wherever you live in the U.S. So the number is 1-800-712-4357. Again, 1-800-712-4357. And I think it's an important number to have either for anyone who's listening who needs this or to share with others. So if someone is considering an abortion or is faced with a pregnancy and not sure how to handle that, or if you have children who are already born who you're struggling to care for, this is a number that you can call to be connected with local resources.
Awesome. Yeah, so one of the things that conservatives or pro-life conservatives get accused of is only caring about the killing of the baby in utero and not caring about the totality of the circumstances that a woman faces in an unplanned or unexpected pregnancy, the economic factors, the societal pressures that woman faces, or father, takes two for this, but it's a great resource, so thank you for sharing that. So the reason why we wanted to start to introduce this topic, and we're going to talk about it often over these next years, it's a theme that we find important. Christians and Catholics find themselves more divided than ever, and especially during this time, December 1st of this year, 2021, so just about a little over a week ago, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, Reproductive Care. The oral arguments were made before the Supreme Court. Many legal analysts are saying that this decision could overturn Roe versus Wade, or it could have a major impact in terms of how some states govern and create laws and policies surrounding the issue of abortion. So it's a historic time, actually.
Absolutely.
But we wanted to clarify a few things with the case first. But before we do, we wanted to introduce Justice Amy Coney Barrett. There's a really fascinating, did you get to see it? We put it on our YouTube channel. There's a fascinating exchange between Justice Barrett and the director of litigation for Jackson Women's Health. So we're gonna play that first. Amy Coney Barrett has been a lightning rod in a lot of ways.
She has. From the very beginning, before she was sworn in, even.
Yeah, and, I mean, how do you think that? What have you seen with the Catholics talking about Amy Coney Barrett when she was first?
I feel like one of the very first things I heard about her is some people saying it's awesome that she's an adoptive parent, or just that she's a mom in general, and being nominated for one of the Supreme Court justice seats. But then other people saying that, no, actually she's racist because of her adopting children who don't look like her. And so that was certainly one thing that I saw playing out on social media. I never saw an in-person discussion like that, but on social media I saw some of those conversations, which is interesting even in the topic of abortion in particular. Feels a little tricky that we're meant to care for life, whether it's born or unborn, and I completely agree. But then if you're not caring for life in just the right way, you're kind of condemned. I also follow, on the flip side, this is quick, I follow a woman on Instagram who's Black. She and her husband have adopted a number of children. At least 2 of them are white, and then at least 2 are white. And she has posted about how people have actually called her racist for adopting children who are white when she is not. So very interesting. But going back to Amy Coney Barrett,
she's a lightning rod.
Yeah.
And to me, she's a fascinating figure because she symbolizes, or is the face really, of the division within the Catholic American Church, but also in a lot of ways she might be the hope. And, you know, she exemplifies, you know, both sides of the issue in certain ways. And that's what this clip that we're going to play for you shows, in a way. Okay. In one way, it succinctly gives both sides of the, at least, legal argument, or the scope of abortion, how it affects the economics of a woman or a family in terms of a child, and also the bodily autonomy. So I found this clip interesting because Justice Amy Coney Barrett actually mentions vaccines very, very briefly. And I'll talk about why this is significant after, in terms of my prediction for where we're heading with vax mandates and whatnot in America. But first, let's play this clip here.
His predictions are worth listening to, I have learned.
I'm not always right.
You are often right.
Wasn't right tonight with predictions about how to set up the stream. Let's see. So where are we? Is it this one right here? Here we go.
The blue.
Thank you.
The voice of Julie Rickelman from the Center for Reproductive Rights,
about the safe haven laws.
presenting for the Jackson Women's Health Center,
that in all 50
and now a
states,
question from
you
Associate
can
Justice
terminate parental
Amy Coney
rights by
Barrett.
relinquishing a child after abortion, and I think the shortest period might have been 48 hours, if I'm remembering the data correctly. So it seems to me, seen in that light, both Roe and Casey emphasized the burdens of parenting. And insofar as you and many of your amici focus on the ways in which the forced parenting, forced motherhood would hinder women's access to the workplace and to equal opportunities, it's also focused on the consequences of parenting and the obligations of motherhood that flow from pregnancy. Why don't the safe haven laws take care of that problem? It seems to me that it focuses the burden much more narrowly. There is, without question, an infringement on bodily autonomy, which we have in other contexts like vaccines. However, it doesn't seem to me to follow that pregnancy and then parenthood are all part of the same burden. And so it seems to me that the choice more focused would be between, say, the ability to get an abortion at 23 weeks or the state requiring the woman to go 15, 16 weeks more and then terminate parental rights at the conclusion. Why didn't you address the safe haven laws, and why don't they matter?
I think they don't matter for a couple of reasons, Your Honor. First, even if some of those laws are new since Casey, the idea that a woman could place a child up for adoption has, of course, been true since Roe. So it's a consideration that the court already had before it when it decided those cases and adhered to the viability line. But in addition, we don't just focus on the burdens of parenting, and neither did Roe and Casey. Instead, pregnancy itself is unique. It imposes unique physical demands and risk on women, and in fact has impact on all of their lives, and their ability to care for other children, other family members, on their ability to work. And in particular, in Mississippi, those risks are alarmingly high. It's 75 times more dangerous to give birth in Mississippi than it is to have a pre-viability abortion, and those risks are disproportionately threatening the lives of women of color.
So are you saying, I mean, actually, as I read Roe and Casey, they don't talk very much about adoption. It's a passing reference that means out of the obligations of parenthood. But as I hear this answer, then are you saying that the right, as you conceive of it, is grounded primarily in the bearing of the child and the carrying of pregnancy, and not so much looking forward into the consequences on professional opportunities and work life and economic burdens?
No, Your Honor, I believe it's both, and that is exactly how Casey talked about it. It talked about the two strands of cases that supported the right. One was the strand of cases supporting bodily integrity, and it cited to cases like Cruzan and Riggins versus Nevada. And the second was the strand of cases supporting decisional autonomy, and specifically decisions related to
Okay, so yeah, for those of us, we're just getting some of our viewers in from Spotify, so sorry for cutting you out from the beginning of the show. But we just played a clip from Justice Amy Coney Barrett from the oral arguments on December 1st, and historic case, Dobbs versus Jackson, women's reproductive health care. And there was a law in Mississippi that was passed in 2018 that would restrict access to abortion in Mississippi, which was already pretty restricted comparatively to other states, but to 15 weeks. So it's even less than the legal standard of viability, which I forget exactly how many weeks that is in terms of the...
I think it's like 22 or something.
But regardless, it's historic, and we brought in the Justice Amy Coney Barrett because she represents, in a lot of ways, the division and also hope that there is for Catholic Americans. And she's a lightning rod. When she was first nominated by President Trump, remember it was in October of 2020, right before the election. The Supreme Court, RBG, she passed on, God rest her soul, and so it was a big controversy right away. So it was immediately partisan. And do you want to talk a little bit about what you were seeing in terms of fighting amongst Catholics?
Yeah, for those on the podcast, I'm sorry if the rest of you are hearing this again, but I remember, so Amy Coney Barrett's a mother, and a couple of her children are adopted, and some, in my case, who I saw, some Catholics were saying that she is racist for adopting children who are a different race than she is. And other Catholics were saying, no, she's living out her, authentic pro-life beliefs where, yes, we recognize the humanity of the unborn, but also we do everything we can, including opening up our own home and loving children as our own because they are her children. So it was very interesting to see that.
Yeah, we picked that picture in a way of her beautiful family, I think. That's on our thumbnail of this video. But yeah, so it just highlights some of the discrepancies amongst Catholics in America. Like some people say, my, what a beautiful family. Look, she embraced life. She adopted. And then others are using those very facts, Catholics, to attack her.
There's even a little division amongst Catholics. Some truly do think that women shouldn't be working at least as much as Amy Coney Barrett is working. Other Catholic women say, like, this is amazing. She seems to be a loving and devoted mother, but also is extremely successful, obviously, in her professional life. So it's interesting.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of focus on that and the issue of abortion, and talk about the division within Catholics in terms of conservative libertarians, which that's kind of what I consider myself as a conservative libertarian.
How do you define that?
Well, it's different. I'm not a neocon, right? And that's kind of the old school Republican, or at least a term like Dick Cheney or George Bush or George Bush Sr., the very strong on war, a very strong tendency towards globalist policies, and they admit as much. Whereas conservative libertarian is more of a focus on the individual and individual rights, and the belief that government, in a way, has the potential to be inherently really, really bad and oppressive, and so that we need to push back against the overgrowth of government and give individuals as many rights as possible, because it's through that diversity of individualism and what makes up the beauty of each person that you find like success in the collective, in a way, versus socially progressive Catholics.
Yeah, which I would define as, it's interesting that you say individualism, because I actually see quite a few people who I would say are probably progressive Catholics saying that rugged individualism is really the root of so many evils in the world. The other thing that I think many progressive Catholics seem to hold in common is an outright desire for socialism. I see many Catholics share the definition of democratic socialism and say this is good. We would vote for it. It's not authoritarian because it's not the government forcing socialism upon us. It's us voting for socialism. So, whereas I think it's really shocking, and I'm actually so surprised that so many of us are okay with this. I think it's really shocking that we literally have socialists in elected positions. To me, that in and of itself says we need to really be on guard. Not because I'm in no way an anarchist. I think government's very important. We'll get into the principles of Catholic social teaching. Maybe we should do that now, because I absolutely think that government has a role in many ways. Not an anarchist, and I wouldn't say I'm a rugged individualist, because I think when people say that, that means that I think like every man is an island, every person for themselves, and that's not at all what I think it is. I think at least the way that you were saying it, I think the focus on individual rights means God gave every single one of us these rights, which nobody can take away, certainly not a government, not even your fellow brother or sister or even your spouse. And we use our individuality, how we were created, how we are different from one another, to serve one another. I don't see it as a, like, let's just be in our own little worlds or anything like that, because I do think that would be wrong. So it'd be, I mean, we have talked about having someone on the show who looks at the world in a very different way, and it would be good to have that discussion then.
Yeah. And we're going to, as we grow the show, that's something that we want to do, is have more guests. We're still trying to work out our technical kinks.
Yes,
and
clearly. But for now,
get other things set up.
yes, let me go through the principles of Catholic social teaching quick. So number one, excuse me, honey, I'm just going to read over. Okay. Number one, dignity of the human person and sanctity of human life. All of these definitions are from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So, the inalienable right to life of every innocent human individual is a constitutive element of a civil society and its legislation. The equality of men rests essentially on their dignity as persons and the rights that flow from it. Every form of social or cultural discrimination in fundamental personal rights on the grounds of sex, race, color, social conditions, language, or religion must be curbed and eradicated as incompatible with God's design. Number two, call to family, community, and participation. Definition, love for the poor is even one of the motives for the duty of working so as to be able to give to those in need. It extends not only to material poverty, but also to the many forms of cultural and religious poverty. The differences among persons belong to God's plan, who wills that we should need one another. These differences should encourage charity. Number three, solidarity. Definition, respect for the human person entails respect for the rights that flow from his dignity as a creature. These rights are prior to society and must be recognized by it. They are the basis of the moral legitimacy of every authority. By flouting them or refusing to recognize them in its positive legislation, a society undermines its own moral legitimacy. The principle of solidarity, also articulated in terms of friendship or social charity, is a direct demand of human and Christian brotherhood. Number four, rights and responsibilities. Freedom is exercised in relationships between human beings. Every human person created in the image of God has the natural right to be recognized as a free and responsible being. All owe to each other this duty of respect. The right to the exercise of freedom, especially in moral and religious matters, is an inalienable requirement of the dignity of the human person. This right must be recognized and protected by civil authority within the limits of the common good and public order. The equal dignity of human persons requires the effort to reduce excessive social and economic inequalities. It gives urgency to the elimination of sinful inequalities. I love those, like that definition together, because it focuses so much on the individual rights that we have and on the need to try to reduce excessive social and economic inequalities. I love those two combined. Number five, option for the poor and vulnerable. In its various forms, human misery is the obvious sign of the inherited condition of frailty and need for salvation, in which man finds himself as a consequence of original sin. This misery elicited the compassion of Christ our Savior, who willingly took it upon himself and identified himself with the least of his brethren. Hence, those who are oppressed by poverty are the object of a preferential love on the part of the Church, which, since her origin and in spite of the failings of many of her members, has not ceased to work for their relief, defense, and liberation through numerous works of charity, which remain indispensable always and everywhere. Number six, we're almost done, there are 8. Number 6, dignity of work and rights of workers. In work, the person exercises and fulfills in part the potential inscribed in his nature. The primordial value of labor stems from man himself, its author and its beneficiary. Work is for man, not man for work. Everyone should be able to draw from work the means of providing for his life and that of his family, and of serving the human community. Number 7, subsidiarity. Excessive intervention by the state can threaten personal freedom and initiative.
The teaching of the Church has elaborated the principle of subsidiarity, according to which a community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its functions, but rather should support it in case of need and help to coordinate the activity within its activity within the activities of the rest of society. Number 8, duty to care for the environment. Man's dominion over inanimate and other living beings granted by the Creator is not absolute. It's limited by concern for the quality of life of his neighbor, including generations to come. It requires a religious respect for the integrity of creation.
Okay. So those are the 8 principles of
Yes.
Catholic social teaching.
Yes.
If you look them up online, you'll see different versions of them. Is that
Yeah,
right?
some have like 7, some, I think one has 9. There are different versions. So
Okay. So how do you come up with this one? This is from...
I think that these ones encapsulate all of them. So I think the ones that have like 6 or 7 just literally leave one out. And I think the ones with 9, I don't remember which. I just think this is a less wordy way to get all of them in. Yeah, and then like I said, every single definition was from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So we today, first I want to say this. Everyone who is baptized Catholic is Catholic forever. So I am not arguing that in any way. There are a lot of arguments about that. But today, for the sake of clarity, we are talking about practicing Catholics. And I don't define that to judge anyone's decision to be a practicing Catholic or a non-practicing Catholic, but simply to say that a practicing Catholic is someone striving to follow church teaching on matters of morals and doctrine. So basically someone who is going to Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation, going to confession at least once a year, and then striving to always follow church teaching on morality.
And we talked about this a little bit, not to sidetrack you, but going to confession once a year, well, what if you don't sin in a whole year?
I know Tony asked.
Is there people...
It's like, I don't know.
You said that it's
We're even the
impossible,
saints.
like everybody sins
I mean, that's
yearly.
I don't.
But
Yearly.
I think there's probably some people who are living, who can go years without sinning. I could be wrong.
Maybe.
But it's got to be possible.
Maybe. I was giving the example of St. Francis, who, when he was tempted to sin, would throw himself in a bush with thorns to distract himself. And St. Therese is very open about her. I think most of her sins were internal, like thoughts about people. But those are. That's amazing to me. What an amazing goal to get to the point where you don't even sin in what and how you think about another person. That's amazing. Your life would be much better if I got to that point, right? Where I never sinned. So
No. We would all be better without sin.
So absolutely. So based on these 8 principles of Catholic social teaching, I think it's clear a practicing Catholic cannot be pro-abortion, meaning a practicing Catholic cannot see aborting another human as a just or an ethical choice. It seems very clear to me that you can't think it's okay to end an innocent life.
And that would mean that doesn't mean that you can't vote for somebody who may support abortion per se, right?
Right. The church is clear that you can vote for someone who supports abortion if that's not the reason you're voting for that person. I mean, there's so many ways that I think the church is clear that at the very least, if you're a practicing Catholic, you can't actually support abortion.
Or choose one for yourself.
Yeah, you can't see it as a choice that's an ethical or moral good. But do you think a practicing Catholic can have differing views on Dobbs versus Jackson? Can a practicing Catholic think, I don't want Roe v. Wade to be overturned, for these decisions to go back to the states, knowing that some states will make abortion laws more restrictive? Like, is it okay? Can a practicing Catholic say, I don't want to legislate this? So again, I think these principles of Catholic social teaching make very clear. I'm not a theologian, but to me it's very, very clear. These principles show us we have to work for, if you're a Catholic, if you're a practicing Catholic, you have to work for a person's right to work and a person's right to ethical work conditions. You have to support and work for decreasing food insecurity. You have to also support people having access to quality food. You can't just say like, okay, great, we made it to a place where nobody's experiencing food insecurity, but some people have awful food that's just pumped full of sugar and awful things, and that's what their kids get. But because I happen to have a little more money, my kids get a healthier diet. I think it's not just
eliminating food insecurity, but also being sure people have quality food. We also, I think, very clearly need to be working for one another. So I think that includes voting for ethical policies, but it can't just be voting. You're certainly not living in community if all you do is vote for the policies you think are best for other people. We also need to be serving one another in our lives. Subsidiarity is also a really important one. So again, there's certainly a place for the federal government, but to say that our first solution, the first place we go to solve a problem is the federal government dictating to every other person in the country is probably out of line with subsidiarity, depending on what the issue is. I also think it's very clear we need to stand for the dignity of life. So that means directly fighting racism, directly fighting ableism, directly fighting abortion. I don't see a different way to read this.
Fighting euthanasia.
Yes.
Standing up for the sick, for the disabled, for the rights of people to get quality or access to health care. And I think the discrepancy comes in terms of how each side determines through policies, right, through legislation, what's the best method to allow these things to take place.
Right. So I think if all you're doing is voting or working for policy change, I don't mean this to sound judgmental. Speaking to myself, you, whoever is doing that, I think that is not in line with Catholic social teaching. I have never thought that just how I vote is all I need to do. In fact, quite the opposite was how I was raised. And those I personally know who fight abortion legislatively do so much to work for the whole person, the parents who are facing an unplanned pregnancy, the parents who are struggling to raise children who are already born, and on and on. So I do not think there's room, if you're following these principles, to only care about how we vote. We also need to care about how we interact and about more than just the policy about abortion. Can you pull up the Martin Luther King quote?
Sure.
This is a quote shared by someone who I love to follow. Her name is Christina Bennett. Her Instagram handle is Black Pro-Life Woman. And I kept her name in there just to know. I mean, it's a quote by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., but I wanted to show that she's the one who shared it. It's
Must
that
be this one?
Yeah. So I'm going to read it quick if you're listening. This is how my brain works. Again, as Tony already said, recognizing that abortion is never a just solution does not mean you always have to vote a certain way. But I do think this is something we should all think on. Again, from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, the other myth that we hear a great deal is a myth that says, in substance, that legislation can't solve the problem that we face in race relations because you can't change the heart. And so we must rely on education to solve the problem and not even look to any legislation. Now, I guess there is some truth in this, at least a half-truth. We realize that if the problem is to be solved ultimately, if we are to have a truly integrated society, men and women must rise to the majestic heights of being obedient to the unenforceable. And I would be the first to acknowledge that. So it may be true that you can't legislate integration, but you can legislate desegregation. It may be true that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. It may be true that the law cannot make a man love me. Religion and education will have to do that, but it can restrain him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important also. And so that while legislation may not change the hearts of men, it does change the habits of men. And we see this every day.
It's beautiful.
I think it's beautiful. I mean, it's how my brain works. And truthfully, I can't think of a situation in life in our country or in other countries where that's not the case. I do think that laws affect how people act. I think whether or not laws are enforced affect how people act. I also think that there is a good in just laws, even if people's hearts are ordered. So, for example, if in the U.S. slavery was still legal and every single person in the U.S. understood how abhorrent it would be for a human to enslave another human, and so nobody was enslaving another human, but it was legal, I would still want that law to be changed. I would still not want that unjust law to be present. So I do think that laws matter. They affect how people act and how they treat one another. And if we want a just society, we need to have just laws. So I don't disagree that we need a change of heart and that we need to address the root causes that, if we're discussing abortion, that lead people to look to abortion as a solution.
But that cannot be the only thing that we're doing, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's both the enforcement of existing law and it's also the lack of having certain laws, also the lack of enforcement, right? That restricts or changes or alters people's behaviors. And there was just a report that came out today that in many of the major cities in the United States, they've reached record levels of homicides and thefts. St. Paul, Minnesota was one of them. Austin, Texas was another one on the list. St. Paul had more homicides in 2021, they're on track, than they did in 2020. So the problem's actually getting worse. And, going back to the enforcement mechanism, sure, you can have all the laws on the books that you want, but if they're not actually enforced, are they really even laws?
Right.
And you can see what's happening in a city like San Francisco, which I just talked to a buddy of mine today. I used to live there. Beautiful city. I love San Francisco. It's sad what's happening there.
We were there a year ago.
And I talked to my buddy and I said, is it as bad in San Francisco as we're seeing in the news reports? Or is it being exaggerated? Because you never know. The news loves to put out sensational stories.
For sure.
And he said, Tony, it's worse. He's like, just within the last week, my car got broken into in the marina. He said another friend of his who owns a real nice bar, happy hour type place, got broken into by group theft. We saw what happened, at some of the stores, and it just shows though. So that you can't. It's against the law to steal.
Yeah.
Right in the San Francisco Bay Area, but if you're not going to arrest people, or charge them, or prosecute them for theft, people are going to do it, and it's playing out right before our eyes.
Yeah.
So
The other thing specifically with abortion, and I did not have time to look this up again today, but I have looked at it. The Guttmacher Institute, who's the research arm for Planned Parenthood, they did a study, and according to them, they said that when abortion is restricted, when laws restrict abortion, the abortions do decrease. And they also have looked into the number of illegal abortions prior to abortion being legal in the U.S. And even with liberal estimates of how many illegal abortions were done prior to Roe v. Wade, abortions definitely have increased since making them legal. But these are things I don't want to go into too much without the data in front of me to show you. But I have only looked at that from the Guttmacher Institute, not from like pro-life sources who may be biased, in the way that I just said it. So that's another important thing. Again, like we said earlier, the way that I'm defining a progressive Catholic, and I'm not defining people in a certain category to be disrespectful or to say that that's their identity by any means. I am just trying to clarify.
We have a lot of socially progressive friends, and we've mentioned many times that we want to fairly present how people on one side, what they believe and what they value. We don't want to diminish what people believe, because we trust that it comes from a good place, right? We're just different people. We're all different. We vote different. We perceive the world different. We calculate things differently.
We see solutions differently, but I think most of us see the same problems and want solutions. And it's good that we can discuss these different ways. And like I said, we should have someone on the show soon so they can present it themselves. But again, how I would define a progressive Catholic is people who have very openly said they support socialism, especially if it is democratic socialism, especially if we have voted for a person who stands for socialism.
So socialism's good if it's the will of the people.
Yes. And then also just someone who, in general, thinks that most of the world's ills can be solved by a larger government. Again, not saying that we should not have any government at all. But so the reason I wanted to define that again is to now say that a belief I have seen from people who seem to me to be progressive Catholics is that we can end abortion by addressing the root causes. So some people who I follow have blatantly said we need to stop with the cut and dry statements about abortion, and we need to stop legislating what happens in a woman's uterus, and we need to stop judging women.
Can you explain what you mean by the cut and dry?
Yeah, so I've seen that. I've seen either cut and dry statements or stop with the black and white statements. I think, I don't know, and this is where I don't want to speak. Like I pulled out actual words I've seen. I'm assuming it means things like probably what I would say, that An unborn human is still a human. And I absolutely believe in bodily autonomy unless what I want to do with my body is going to directly harm or kill someone else. So while I would give my life to stand up for the right to bodily autonomy, but I don't think that someone's bodily autonomy allows us to directly harm someone else. So I don't think that bodily autonomy is present in the situation where another human's life will be directly ended by the choice that you make. So I do, and we'll get to that in a minute actually with these slides if you want to pull them up. But first of all, I completely agree that root causes of all evil need to be addressed. Absolutely. One example, it's not enough to stop a homicide right before it happens. We absolutely should be looking into the root causes. What led someone to get to a point where they are trying to kill another human being, and why is that other human being in a situation that's unsafe, whether it's a school or their neighborhood or a grocery store? Like, these are not ethical situations these are not good situations for anyone to be in. We absolutely should address the root causes, not just end the homicide right before it happens. In the same way, we do need to address the root causes that lead someone to seek out an abortion, whether it's food insecurity or poor housing or unsafe housing or unclean housing or the ability to feed the children they have, I guess that's food insecurity, or an abusive relationship, or there are so many reasons. Sex selection.
The guy
gender
wants
selection.
them to.
Yeah.
The man's putting pressure on them to get rid of the baby, or the parents, or society.
Not wanting a child who has a disability, all of these other things. So we do need to address those root causes and then come up with ethical solutions, not abortion, not a solution that's ending a human life. But the other thing that I think is important to recognize is that not every abortion is done for an economic reason. Again, this is per Guttmacher, the research arm of Planned Parenthood. So even if we alleviated all food insecurity, all unsafe or inadequate housing, if we made all schools incredible, if we eliminated all abusive relationships, all of these things, if we somehow made it so that nobody would abort their child because the child's a girl and they wanted a boy or something like that, if we could eliminate all of these situations, there's still going to be some other reason why people are searching out an abortion. And I would encourage looking at Guttmacher because they do lay out the reasons why people seek abortion. So we can't just say if we have better welfare programs, there will be no more abortion. That doesn't mean I'm saying we don't need better welfare programs. It's just if our goal is eliminating abortion, the conversation has to be much more broad than just welfare programs.
Got it.
So regarding bodily autonomy, Catholic social teaching makes clear our inalienable right to freedom, and also makes clear the right that each of us has to a life worthy of a human, worthy of our dignity. So these things are very important and should not be minimized. Can you pull up these screenshots? So I'm just taking this directly.
Right here?
Yes, from Feminists Choosing Life, because they answer this really well. So what I'm reading here was originally shared by Jamila Jamil Official, I think is how you say her name. And she said, here's the thing, guys. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when life begins. It doesn't matter whether a fetus is a human being or not. The entire argument is a red herring, a distraction, a subjective and unwinnable argument that could not matter less. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about a fertilized egg or a fetus or a baby or a 5-year-old or a Nobel Prize winning pediatric oncologist. Nobody has the right to use your body against your will, even to save their life or the life of another person. That's it. That's the argument. You cannot be forced to donate blood or marrow or organs, even though thousands die every year on waiting lists. They cannot even harvest your organs after your death without your explicit, written, pre-mortem permission. Denying women the right to abortion means we have less bodily autonomy than a corpse. So again, that's from Jamila Jamil Official, Feminists Choosing Life, an Instagram account, shared that, and then their part of their response I'm going to share here.
The next one?
You can look it up. Yeah, the next one, and it starts with it has the one. Okay.
So they respond to, it does matter when life begins and whether the human being in the womb is considered a person. According to them, Justice Blackmun, who wrote the majority opinion in Roe, expressly stated, quote, if this suggestion of personhood is established, the appellant's, am I saying that right? The appellant's?
Appellant, yeah.
Okay. The appellant's case, of course, collapses, for the fetus's right to life would be guaranteed specially by the 14th Amendment, end quote. And then number 2 from them. Thanks, Tone. So this credit goes to Secular Pro-Life, another account I highly recommend following if you're interested in this. So Secular Pro-Life shared this. Hypotheticals are not truly analogous to abortion unless they contain these elements. 1, you chose to risk making this person's life dependent on you. So 99.5% of abortions follow consensual sex. There are a lot of people who think that abortion should be outlawed except in cases of rape and incest. And this is why. In all cases except rape and incest, which is horrible, you did make a choice that led to a person's life being dependent on you. Number 2, no one else can save this person. Number 3, your bodily donation is temporary. And number 4, your refusal means actually killing this person, not just neglecting to save him. I personally think that last one is very interesting. It's very true that you are not obligated to donate a kidney, even a kidney. You can, if you have both of your kidneys, you can donate one to someone else and still be alive, but you are not obligated to donate one of your kidneys to someone on a transplant list. However, when we're discussing abortion, if you choose to have a doctor abort your child, you are not just neglecting to save your child in an extraordinary way, like an organ transplant. You are that person who is aborting your child, that doctor, is actually ending their life. And then the last slide for this, again, the credit for this goes to feminists choosing life. It matters that the human being in the womb is the biological child / offspring of their parents. 1, parental obligations do not arise from ongoing consent, but from an affirmative duty to care for a child who is naturally vulnerable and entrusted to their parents' care. Number 2, abortion is a service which requires many levels of societal participation. It is not an autonomous act. Society can and should ban services that kill innocent children. Thank you. So we will wrap up the show quickly, but there are so many facets of Catholic social teaching besides just abortion. So I want to touch on a couple really important ones that we are talking about a lot that I, if I may say so myself, think all of us Catholics should be talking about a lot. One is, how do we fight racism? We will have many other shows on this. We did a brief show on Ahmaud Arbery that touches on this, and that's why we did it, but we'll talk more about this.
You can see that on our YouTube page.
Yes,
It's called, what is it called again? We titled it.
I think it's what Christians can learn from?
Yeah, what Christians can learn from the Ahmaud Arbery murder.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
But succinctly, the way that we can fight racism is 1, call it out unapologetically, and 2, be truthful in all things. Live not by lies. Statistics and root causes and efficacious policies matter when we're fighting racism, just like they matter when we're fighting abortion. It is not compassionate or loving to post a meme that is inaccurate. And I'm not calling out a particular person, just that's not fighting racism. Looking into what is actually true, what are the root causes, how can we solve the root causes efficaciously, not just in a way that looks good on a sign. And I'm truly not trying to call out a specific sign or a specific post. I'm just saying these kind of general social media sharings are not necessarily fighting racism in a tangible way, but we should be fighting it in a tangible, concrete, truthful way. And then the jabs. I'm trying to not say the word. I really don't like censoring and saying different words. It just annoys me. It sounds annoying. I don't like it. But
We're gonna have a show about the new language that's surrounding censored speech.
Yes.
You know, there's actually a new language or dialect that's evolving to get around
there
the
is.
AI
It's crazy.
censors.
Yes. So is jabs an acceptable
Not
term?
sure it is.
Okay, maybe not. So maybe we'll
Pokes.
get censored anyways. Pokes.
Doses.
Okay. So the doses.
Which Amy Coney Barrett mentioned
Yes.
in her oral dialogue or her questioning,
Yes.
specifically about vaccines. So
Specifically about bodily autonomy, right? Like she basically was saying bodily autonomy is not always, you know, the greatest good. Bodily autonomy does not trump every other consideration. Just like when we're discussing abortion, bodily autonomy is extremely important, but you can't use your bodily autonomy to kill someone or to have someone's life be ended. So does bodily autonomy come into play with the pokes if we're looking at Catholic social teaching? You probably know that, Tony, and I think that it does. A couple things to think of. You absolutely can see the pokes as purely good for every single person and still recognize that the segregation that is happening around the world surrounding these pokes is unprecedented, at least in our country, and absolutely unethical. So at the very least, I think that we as Catholics, fully poked and not poked at all, can link arms and fight that segregation. It is not evidence-based, specifically with these pokes that do not prevent transmission or infection and that have very quickly waning efficacy. It is not evidence-based and it is not ethical to be segregating on these. That is something I have.
and it's disproportionately affecting communities of color.
Absolutely.
And also lower class
Yes.
global citizens. You can see it
Yes.
playing out specifically in many countries, but look at Australia.
Yeah.
The Aborigine
class, it's
people,
the
the native Australians, the Aborigines, who've had their own land this whole time, and it's kind of similar to the U.S. where they're sovereign within a sovereign country, but they're being people are being dragged out of their homes and put into these quarantine camps.
Yes.
And you also see the classism, construction workers in Melbourne who were protesting because they were told that they couldn't work until they got the jab.
Yep,
Literally.
absolutely.
And they were forced to choose that or their livelihood or their freedom. And you can guess what a lot of people chose there.
Yeah.
You see it in New York City too. I saw a rally with conservatives and BLM together.
Yes. Yeah, I did too.
They called it a Trump rally. It wasn't
Yeah.
a Trump rally.
No,
They
it
call
wasn't.
anything conservative Trump
Yeah.
now just to get people mad. But
Yeah.
they were arm in arm fighting for freedom.
Yeah.
Because in New York City, I don't know what the numbers are now, but still disproportionately it's African Americans and Latinos who are the ones who are unvaccinated and they're not able to go to restaurants, attend school.
And this counts for children as young as 5. Yeah, I mean, it is not evidence-based, and it's, I'm trying to not be hyperbolic. I want to say it is insane that in New York, if you are fully poked, you can enter a restaurant with a cough, which very well could be SARS-CoV-2. But if you are not poked, perfectly healthy, with a mask on, even an actually effective mask, you cannot enter that restaurant. It is not evidence-based. It is not ethical. So that's one thing to think about when all of us are making decisions. We have a decision to make for our own bodies and what we put into it, but we also need to look at how this is affecting our brothers and sisters more broadly. And I think one thing to keep in mind is this like inhumane segregation that we've seen over and over in multiple countries throughout human history. I do not think people are evil enough that type of segregation is just going to one day happen based on nothing. There's always going to be some reason that's going to make people be like, okay, I'm not going to speak against it because I don't want to sound anti-vax, or I'm not going to speak against it because I think maybe it's kind of good. Maybe it will end the pandemic. And at some point, maybe we could have thought it would have ended the pandemic. And if that were the case, perhaps I would be making a different decision myself. But we know absolutely now it is not going to end the pandemic. This virus is here to stay. Many of us knew this from looking at the evidence very early on, at least last summer of 2020. But, I'm sorry, not summer of 2020, summer of 2021, this past summer. But now everybody is saying that. The COVID czar in Israel is saying that. Dr. Fauci is saying it. Dr. Walensky is saying it.
Well, SARS-CoV-2 is in the family of viruses called the coronaviruses, and never in the history of mankind have we been able to come up with a vaccine to eradicate a coronavirus. And it's simply because they mutate so fast.
Yeah, but even, and I agree with that, but what I really, really want the world to recognize is that the poke for the very first version of this before it mutated still didn't prevent infection or transmission. So even if somehow this didn't mutate, if there was no Delta, no Omicron, no all of the other ones in between, it still wouldn't obliterate this virus because the pokes don't prevent infection or transmission, even of the original virus.
And the proponents say, though, and there's truth, it does prevent severe infection, especially
Absolutely,
people
yeah.
who are at risk in those first few months after inoculation. And the other aspect of it is if you are infected, potentially you're not infected for as long, right?
Yes,
or
I
as
think
severe.
you clear,
So even though the
yep.
studies have showed that an infected vaccinated person and an infected non-vaccinated person contain the same amount of viral load in their nasal pharynx.
And some studies show higher actually in vaccinated, but
They could have a shorter
Yes.
period of time. But like you were saying,
The vaccinated person
the part
clears
that
it
doesn't
faster.
make sense, though, is if you're going to give people who are vaccinated the pass to go everywhere. I mean, you've seen it. There was a case in Europe. There was a big hospital party for the Christmas. I think there's 100 plus people there from the hospital. All of them vaccinated, but they got a large number of them got infected.
yeah.
So,
And so many of the first cases of Omicron, apparently, however they're testing for that,
Omicron.
yes, were in fully vaccinated. I mean, some of the cases I shared on our page were very recently triple vaccinated people. So that should have been
we're
still.
speaking too much.
Oh.
The code words.
Oh, time to move on. Okay.
Code words.
Okay. So that shows that even during that time period where it's the most efficacious, they still got this new variant, which means they can still pass it on.
Yep.
So,
And it almost seems like, just one more thing, is that the people who are getting Omicron are fully dosed in most cases, from what
Really?
I've seen. Yeah. The cases that have emerged. So
yeah.
who knows?
Another thing, just true, like, we as Catholics need to live not by lies. So that does not mean don't get this poke. Make your own assessment with your provider based on your conscience, based on accurate data, and based on your own health history. But live not by lies. And another thing to look at with all of that is the fact that any dose past 2, and I think we should do a show just on this, but any dose past 2, there is no randomized controlled trial to show its efficacy or safety. And it's really frustrating to have doctors who asked someone with naturally acquired antibodies, why are you not getting the poke despite having antibodies? There isn't an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, to show that the natural antibodies will be better than the poke. So they wanted an RCT to back up the decision to go with naturally acquired antibodies, at least for the time being, despite the fact that that's always how we have done things. I had chickenpox as a child, so I didn't get the varicella vaccine. It's not even recommended for me because I had chickenpox already. But those same doctors, in my experience, have no problem recommending a 3rd and soon to be 4th booster for everyone, despite the fact that the 6-month randomized control trial that we have for these pokes is only for 2 pokes. So that's frustrating, and that's something that we should be able to have an answer to. And you're not crazy for wanting those answers, in my opinion. But another really important thing that I absolutely want to do a whole show on is that the CDC published a peer-reviewed study showing 3 factors that decrease your risk of hospitalization if infected with SARS-CoV-2. And the 3 things are: 1, not drinking soda pop; 2, getting, I believe it's 7+ hours of sleep a night, and 3, regularly exercising. And we'll do a show where we can lay out exactly how much exercise they say. But it doesn't say you must have a perfect BMI, you must eat only whole foods or anything like that. Relatively doable things. No pop, 7 hours of sleep a night or more. And again, I think it was a pretty reasonable amount of exercise. So I do think there's something really wrong when our health agencies, but also when we as Catholics are not discussing these things and sharing them with one another, because we know that the efficacy of the pokes wanes quickly. We know you can be infected with this even if you are fully poked. If we truly care about people's lives and people's health, we should be sharing this information widely. And that's very frustrating to me.
And we also know that one of the keys to beating severe disease is early intervention, which is another tragedy about the public health messaging. It's been so fully invested to get everybody fully dosed that they haven't gotten the message out that whether you're dosed or not, if you fall within the risk categories, if you have over 1 or 2 comorbidities that are predictors of severe disease, that you should have some sort of early intervention plan that you've discussed with your provider, your trusted health provider, doctor or MP or PA or
Absolutely.
whoever. But having that plan early, because we've known some people personally who didn't know about monoclonal antibodies, for instance, or some of these other early intervention therapies, and by the time your loved one, or you is struggling with oxygen, struggling to breathe, needing to go to the hospital, it's too late. It's too late, and the tragedy is what they're. It's better to have early intervention in a plan. So yes, you can still make it through, but
Right. Yeah. So we can make a lot of, I think that's maybe one that I want to do, the CDC study, because it's literally life-saving information for both fully poked and not poked. And we'd love to hear from you guys what shows would be most interesting to you. But
I wanted to, can we talk about Amy Coney Barrett just a little more?
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
I just wanted to kind of, at the beginning, because we had so many technical issues, that was our third time starting it, so we didn't quite stay on what we were going to say. But Amy Coney Barrett is, to me, she symbolizes the rift and the solution within the Catholic American politics or politicos or people who deeply care about policies and solutions and how they affect society and our culture. Because what you're seeing right now, I think she's got, and I think she knows this, maybe I'm wrong, but I think she knows her role in history, her special moment or place in history.
Okay.
She's coming in a historic seat. She replaced Justice Ginsburg, RBG, right? And that in itself, the timing of it, she was nominated by arguably the most loved and hated president of all time, President Donald Trump,
Maybe true.
right before the election. So even that was a huge controversy because people were saying that they should wait until the presidency was determined. So she came in a firestorm. We saw firsthand Catholics attacking her, calling her a pawn or evil, or they condemned even her Catholicism,
or racist, literally racist,
right?
Yeah. Or
She falls on the crazy side of Catholic according to the mainstream media. It's perfectly okay to be, Joe Biden Catholic or Nancy Pelosi Catholic, but if you're a Catholic like Amy Coney Barrett, gasp, large family, gasp, adopted, multicultural children.
Yeah. Doesn't support abortion, unlike Pelosi.
Doesn't support abortion, pro-life.
Yeah.
But I think Amy Coney Barrett realizes all of this. And so this is why my prediction kind of comes into play a little bit here. So my prediction with the vaccine, I said the word. My prediction is that ultimately the mandates are going to get to the Supreme Court. Even though they've been thoroughly spanked down in the lower appellate court so far,
Yeah.
federal
I don't even wanna hear
contractors
it.
was delayed. The OSHA requirements have been delayed. Or by delayed, I mean they've been basically squashed.
Yeah.
I forget what the legal term is, but I think somehow they're going to trickle up. Maybe I'm wrong.
And you
Maybe
think-
this is the end of it. Maybe it was just a ploy to motivate employers to put these mandates in and motivate everybody else to do it. But if it gets to the Supreme Court, and that's why that clip that we played earlier was so important, because Justice Barrett actually mentioned very briefly bodily autonomy and the doses and how the two go hand in hand in her comments or questioning
Yeah.
to the
Jackson.
litigator for Jackson.
Yeah.
And so going back to Amy Coney Barrett, I think she realizes that you have two issues. You have the pro-life issue, overturning Roe versus Wade, which I believe she wants to do. She wants to be that person who came in and took this case up and effectively overturned Roe v. Wade. But even though they don't say that there is, and politics are supposed to be completely absent of the Supreme Court justices, and I think they do a good job for the most part of keeping their politics out of their decisions, and even though they're chosen by politicians and sworn in by politicians, at the same time they're a separate branch of government, and but that doesn't mean that they don't have agendas.
Right.
And I think the agenda that Amy Coney Barrett has is she wants to overturn Roe versus Wade. And I think the great compromise is going to be approving dose mandates on like a federal level through OSHA or through regulations or whatever.
Why do you think she has to compromise on it though? Because it's not like
Because the issues are
it's not like
related.
a senator who has to be like, here, I'll give you this, I'll vote on your bill that I don't really agree with here, but then you have to help me with this bill that I'm passionate about.
Because I
Like,
think
can't she? I mean, and maybe she's just very pro jab mandate. Like,
because
for her, it might not be a compromise.
Because I think that she, beyond the Supreme Court, I think she also sees herself in history as a unifier.
Ugh.
And
Sorry.
she wants to unify the Catholic Church again.
Do you
And,
think it will?
well, look at the arguments that you've seen about masks and about the doses amongst Catholics. You know, the progressive social Catholics chastise pro-life, pro-medical freedom, conservatives, Catholics who are saying, no, you don't need to wear a mask.
Yeah.
No, our kids are not going to wear masks to school. And
Right.
no, nobody needs to have, not everybody needs to get the dose. It's an individual choice. And the social progressive Catholics are saying, you have to take care of others. It's not just you that you're affecting by not wearing a mask, by not getting the dose. You're actually recklessly putting other people in danger. And there may be some truth to that, a little bit. There might not, but there's a point of debate. Like, and it comes down to the science part, and that's why the science part's so important, and that's why it's been bypassed in a lot of ways.
Totally. And that should be concerning to especially providers in healthcare, but they seem to ignore it most.
Because we were discussing this last night. If the doses were 99.9% effective at preventing transmission, and that there was, if we could get 80 to 95% of the population of the world dosed, that we could fully eradicate the virus, like, wouldn't we have more of a responsibility to, maybe accept the idea that we should mandate it? Or if masking our children prevented, if it was proven that it really prevented death and unnecessary death and spread of the virus, wouldn't we have an obligation to do that?
So I look at it. I love Mother Teresa's quote that we have forgotten that we belong to one another. And it's totally true. Every decision we make affects other people. Me staying up too late and being a little cranky with my kids could very well set them on a trajectory of being cranky spouses someday and Like every single thing we do affects other people. You drive a little fast, you decide to look at one text when you're driving, like everything we do affects everyone. So I totally agree with that, like that what we do affects other people, but we need to look at it in every facet of our lives. And we're not. I don't know anyone who does that. And there are just so many things. I mean, like you said, the science behind it, but also, there's a lot of science behind it. Like I shared on our page that, I forget his name now, the physician who works at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, very, very pro-vax, very, very much so. In fact, he's the person, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia is the source that anytime I ask questions about poke schedules in kids, providers refer me to them as the authority on this. And he said that poking everyone may actually make things worse. And there has been actual evidence, not just hearsay, from scientists saying that from the very beginning. And I don't think I know a single scientist who has said nobody should get this. But there is something.
There's some.
Oh, are there? Okay,
yeah.
maybe there are. But bioindividuality has always existed and always will exist. So, I suppose we could talk about this theoretical situation, but the reality is bioindividuality exists and there is unknown. But there are a lot of knowns, and the knowns show that I don't think that getting this, especially if it's a risk to you or you're a young child, the poke in and of itself, I think we have enough data to show this is not protecting other people. And in fact, it may be making life a heck of a lot worse for a lot of people. In fact, I think it is. Many things that we've done have concretely made life worse for many people. And you can't say, oh, I'm pro-life because I do this intervention, but ignore how interventions have harmed people. We truly are connected. Every single thing we do affects other people. Like the children, the increase in suicides, increase in homicides, increase in depression. Like these things are not going to go away in a year. We have directly harmed with policies an entire generation of children. I don't know if, generation spans, I don't know.
Listen, you're preaching to the choir on this. I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. But what I'm saying is there's a whole other group of people who disagree with you emphatically.
Yeah.
And everything they see on the TV, everything that comes out from the CDC or the FDA or the newspapers or a lot of their local doctors are saying something completely the opposite of you.
I realize
and
that.
that's why for me it does come down to a debate of the science.
Yeah.
Because if you really believe that if 80% of the people got the dose and if 99% of people masked up, like we have been told that the disease would be eradicated,
Yeah.
I think I would believe differently.
But this is why I say live not by lies. You can make whatever choice you want in your own life if it's not directly harming someone else. But if you're going to go out of your way to tell someone else what they ought to do, and you have not looked into this, you have not looked into the reality of what it does and does not do, that is not okay. If you are a provider, if you are a layperson, if you're telling someone to do something else and you haven't looked into it and it's just based on...
Yeah, but what if you've looked into it and what you've looked into is lies and you've been duped by it? And you can't blame somebody for that, because if you Google things or if you read your newspaper or you watch your TV, if they're telling you something over and over and over again, and in order to find information that you're talking about, you have to use DuckDuckGo or Dodger
I
on
haven't
fact
used
checkers.
DuckDuckGo to find any of the studies.
You know what I mean, though.
I do know what you mean, but I guess this is all I'm
everything
saying.
in the mainstream is going directly against what you're saying, and it
Yes, but-
supports what you're saying. People who are promoting lies are saying,
Yeah.
and it's not that easy. I don't think. Like this,
This may be fair.
to obtain the truth is very difficult.
Well, I
talk
agree
to
with
doctors.
That. I don't think that
talk to your
have-
average everyday doctors in Florida or Minnesota or Australia or in Europe, and they're going to tell you something extremely different from what you just said. And these are people with lab coats, and stethoscopes
have one.
around their necks.
I have stethoscope.
I know. You
Your
should
sis
wear
used
it.
stethoscopes
I'm not saying
more
you're
often.
wrong. I'm just saying it's you can't just say that they're promoting or spreading lies. It's not necessarily true. Like if they really believe it, they really believe it.
Yeah, The thing is, I don't see anyone who's saying that sharing any studies. They're just sharing a claim. So I guess that tells me they're not being duped. They're just sharing a claim that they haven't looked into. And again, if they want to do that with their bodies or their children's bodies, that's totally fine. I don't disrespect that in any way. Never once have I told someone they should or shouldn't do something unless it's directly harming someone else. What I'm saying is to just share a claim, no data to back it up. And truthfully, in the case of 3 shots or 4 shots, there is no data to back it up. That is not evidence-based. They are sharing a recommendation from somebody, in this case, Fauci and Walensky, who happen to be in the positions to make those recommendations. Yeah, but the doctors get it from Fauci and Walensky. It's not based on data. So I don't think they're being duped. They're just sharing the recommendation they hear. Again, they can go with the recommendation they hear, but to go out of your way and tell someone you have to do this without looking into it yourself at all is concerning to me. That's a trend I would like to see end. I mean, I don't think I've done that. I don't think I've ever posted because I don't believe this.
So you're saying...
In fact, I've strongly told some people I think they should consider getting this poke. I have not made a post saying you ought not get this or you ought get it. What I'm saying is that's a really bold claim to tell someone you ought to put this in your body. And so if you're going out of your way to publicly make that statement, that's a big statement. To say that and to not have looked into it yourself is a strange trend in our society that has somehow become acceptable, but I think is cringeworthy, to use a modern day term. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, these people, it's more like, how did we get to this place as a society where that's acceptable? I have no data to back this up. Neither does my doctor. Neither does Fauci. In fact, he lied about it, but I'm still going to tell you to put this in your body. That's a big claim. That's all. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not trying to say, oh, they're lying. That's
but
not my point.
I know
point
how we
more...
got there, though. And that, like I said, it comes from mass media giving a uniform message.
I suppose, yeah.
And the government cooperating with it.
Yeah.
So to go against the grain,
yeah, to
try to look into things yourself when everybody and everything you see, everything you read,
yeah.
80%, 70% of doctors and nurses are telling you
it's not that hard to look into it. All you need to do
is
look
sure
at a
is.
study
It sure is hard.
and not at a claim.
It sure is hard. I totally disagree. It's very, very hard because it's not about the fact of looking into it. It's the fact of going against the mainstream thought. Because you're going to lose friends.
Yeah.
You're going to be ostracized. You're going to be ridiculed.
Yeah.
You're going to be called every name in the book. And you may lose your job. You could lose your livelihood.
Yeah.
Your reputation could go down the drain. Which is why, in my theory, is there's actually more doctors and scientists that know something's not right in terms of the narrative that's being promoted, but they don't want to risk losing all those things that they've built their entire lives to achieve. And
I mean, that's fair, but can't you just silently look into it? If you don't want to, I don't know. There's still a difference.
You're going to silently look into it, but what are you going to do with
way.
your silent information? Because if you start telling your patients,
I guess I'm talking
then you're going to
about,
lose your license.
I'm talking about people who don't work in healthcare, who are crusaders for everyone to get this. And I'm saying that's a bold claim. There are a couple things I will speak up for unapologetically that I don't think, the things we talked about at the beginning, I don't think directly ending another person's life is ever okay. I also think it's absolutely not in line with Catholic social teaching if all you do is vote that way and you don't actually care about the root causes and personally work to change the root causes that make people see abortion as a solution. I will tell people that fully, and on any stage I'll make that claim, and I will tell someone these realities of how these pokes are not going to eradicate this virus. But I never have and I never will tell someone you can't get this either for the sake of conscience or for the sake of your health. And that's a whole other step. They're just not, to you, I probably make way too many, cut and dry statements, superlative statements, but to choose to write to all the people who happen to read this, I know nothing about your medical history. And yet I'm going to tell you that you have to put this. It's very, I don't know, it's fascinating to me.
It is, and it's not fascinating. It's scary,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
to me, it's completely understandable. That's the only area where I disagree. Is like,
Yeah.
I get why it is the way that it
Yeah.
is.
I'm maybe more naive. You understand the
people who
breathe
are
better.
screeching, the Catholics who are shaming others for going to mass without a mask on, or wanting their kid to go to school without a mask on, or shaming others for not dosing up their kids or themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think they really believe what is being told to them over and over and over and over.
Will
and
they
over
then
again.
want to continue this forever? Because influenza is still more likely to kill children. So
Yes, they
wouldn't
will.
So they will. They just
Yes.
want kids in masks forever and ever.
Pretty much.
And they don't care about the data that show. I mean, do they,
They
think
think-
that the way we've harmed children is just based on shutdowns and not masks? Which might be true. I'm not. You know this. Like, I'm not as anti-mask as some who are very for pro bodily autonomy. I think I'm very pro bodily autonomy, but I'm not anti-mask, especially if they are effective. I think if there's a situation where people are not being treated as individuals, like a child with special needs or an adult with special needs who can't wear a mask or something, like that's appalling. I have no patience for not allowing that person to go without a mask. But I'm not necessarily anti-mask. What I am anti is lies. And so if we're telling lies about what they do and don't do, or if we're saying you're not pro-life if you don't wear a fabric mask now, but as soon as the government says you can take it off, you take it off, even though all the data showed you can still get the virus and transmit it. Like I really struggle with that. If your goal is truly protecting other people, you shouldn't just do what Fauci says. You should look into what is protecting other people. You should know that even if you had 2 pokes, you can still become infected and transmit the virus. So if you trust that cloth mask and you wore it when Fauci said to, you should have kept it on, even when Biden was like, it's either masked or vaxxed. You should have kept it on. The data was clear. You could still infect and transmit. That's what I don't understand. And that's where I don't think there's room for someone who's just going to do what they're told without looking into what is actually efficacious. That's where I don't have patience for the you're not pro-life if you don't do this. Well, that you're not really saying someone's not pro-life because they're not doing the efficacious thing to protect someone. You're saying you're not pro-life because you're not following whatever Fauci is saying whenever he's saying it. And I'm not even saying everything Fauci says is wrong. I'm just saying that shouldn't be our standard. Our standard should be truth and efficacy and a holistic view of humanity.
Oh, good. This is still running. Just checking to make sure we're still on Spotify. So it is. So one last questions ahead in follow up to Roe versus Wade potentially being overthrown and restricting abortion in certain states. So for the social progressive, do they want to see Roe versus Wade overturned? Do they want to see a legal end to abortion?
So
And this is what I would love to have a guest on to
Yes,
debate.
we should.
Because I want to hear a strong progressive viewpoint on this issue of life
Yeah.
and being pro-life in
do
the 21st century, and then tie it into racism, tie it into masks,
Mm-hmm.
tie it into the doses, and tie it into immigration.
I think there are probably a lot of progressive Catholics based on the definition we said before. And again, not saying that at all in a demeaning way, just progressive Catholics who think that basically more socialism is good, that we're closer to Denmark than we are to Venezuela, things like that. Which I think is false for many reasons, but we could do a whole other show on that. I think that progressive Catholics, there are a lot who do want no more abortion and want us to focus on the root causes. But if it came down to it, my guess is they would probably say, yeah, let's make it, let's outlaw it, but also let's have all the social structures in place. But I have seen only one person who and she's talks about her Catholic faith and has many, many followers, and she clearly said, I am done legislating what happens in women's wombs, or I'm done women's uteruses. And so I guess I take that to mean that I don't know if that means she wants it to be legal or if she just doesn't want that to be the focus. That's kind of a thread that I see a lot, that the focus shouldn't be the legislation, which I actually have said a lot. But I think when legislation is before you, when you have to vote, you need to think legislatively in that moment. It doesn't mean that the scope of your being pro-life is just in that vote that has to do with abortion. Your scope of being pro-life, by and large, should be day-to-day, how you treat others and how you serve others. But when it comes to voting, yes, whether or not it's an ethical law, I think matters. I just went on my thoughts, which is not what you asked. Yes, we should interview someone so that they can give their thoughts.
So what do you think they would say, though? Yes or no?
That they want it outlawed?
Yeah.
I guess I feel like I can't say. I tried to give a very fair, but
I
I
think
don't
they
know.
would probably skirt around it and say that they want to they'd rather create a culture and an environment and not do it politically
Yeah.
to reduce abortions and to support mothers and families so that abortion becomes less and less as an option
Sure.
for people.
What would
And-
you say that you want?
What would I want?
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
Both.
I would say both.
Because
as
I
well.
don't think the solution is completely legal, but laws can sway society and it can form beliefs. Even hearing those oral arguments on December 1st is a remarkable thing in a way because it's causing, or whether they know it or not, people are being forced to reevaluate their
Yeah,
own
which is a beautiful thing.
moral compass
Yeah.
with this issue because
Yeah,
it's being
it's
argued
beautiful.
right out there in for everybody to hear. Now,
Here's another
who
thing,
knows how many
sorry.
people actually heard it? But
Right. This, I don't know. I think of this often. If abortion was no longer an option, think of all of the funds that would go towards other things. I mean, knowing our government, they would probably just put it to war overseas or something. But the funds that should go to other things, whether it's tax dollars or donations, at one point I knew how much Bill Gates gives to Planned Parenthood. I mean, it's millions, but I don't remember the exact number, and I don't remember if it's
his father
over
used to be the
time
chair
or
of
Planned Parenthood, right?
one of them, I think.
But he gives so much to Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood does not provide diapers. They do not provide clothes for your 10-year-old when you can't clothe them. They don't help you to get a job. They don't help provide transportation. They don't even provide free pregnancy tests. I've been there twice when women tried to get a pregnancy test and they were told it would cost $15 for one test, which is insane. I have never spent even close to $15 on one pregnancy test. So if all of the funds that go to Planned Parenthood maybe still went there, but they no longer ended the life of unborn children, think of all of the other things they could do with that money. Good things. I don't know. That makes so much more sense to me. Stop funding the direct killing and fund the problems that we all agree exist. Or fund the solution to the problems that we all agree exist.
It'd be a two-pronged approach. One would be through policy and legislation to restrict or make it less accessible in a way, but you can't do that solely on its own.
Right.
I mean, we've discussed the theoretical impact. Like, what if abortion and abortifacients, like Plan B, and birth control pills, what if that was all made illegal at the
Overnight.
snap of a fingers?
Yeah.
Like, what would happen in the immediate? What would happen in the
I would
next
hope
year?
the church would stand up.
What would happen in
rise
the
up.
next year? What would happen in the next 2 years to 5 years?
What would
So
happen
we
in 30
need to
years when all
have-
of those babies are
We need
in
to
their
have
30s?
the policy changes in place that aren't just law, that support families, that support women when they're pregnant, that support alternative options like adoption. Amy Coney Barrett brought up a pretty good point, I thought. If every state, she said, some of them with a minimum requirement of 48 hours, some of them are longer, but I think 48 is a minimum, but every parent, every mother who has a child has the option to drop their child off and relinquish their parental rights, no questions asked, at a safe location,
haven,
like
yeah.
firehouses and
Hospitals. I think
hospitals.
sometimes,
It depends on the state.
Right.
But so her question was, what difference does it make to carry a baby for an additional 16 weeks or 20 weeks, or in the case of Mississippi, 25 weeks, if they can legally, no questions asked, relinquish their parental rights? And the idea is therefore their careers wouldn't be affected. They wouldn't have to worry about food insecurity. They wouldn't have to raise a baby that they didn't want. And one thing that really bothers me when you hear this is social progressive, maybe not Catholics, but the progressives will say, "Oh, what are you going to adopt them all? Are you going to take care of all the moms? Let me see. You put your name up there first." And
like, okay.
well, yeah, it's
Yes,
like so many
please.
people who have
Break down the
struggled, such
barriers
as
to it.
ourselves, with fertility and having kids. It's like, yeah, we would, because to adopt a child right now, you need a lot of money.
Yeah, at least for infant adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
25, 50,000 plus. International adoption is pretty much impossible now. There's some rare cases where it's possible, but a lot of the
And maybe it should be. I think there have been some.
maybe there's a
some
good reason for
inappropriate
it.
things with that.
But there's
the
so many
point is,
parents who
yes.
can't have kids,
Right.
or who struggle with having kids, or even have children that would love to adopt.
Yes.
So it's just insulting to me when I hear that. Like, okay, sign up. You sign up to
Yeah.
adopt. You put your name up first. It's okay. Okay, where?
So that's, yes, I agree. That's one instance. The other reason why that statement is frustrating to me is it's so dehumanizing of that child who is not yet born, because we have children who live in poverty and in terrible situations. Also, I mean, we can talk about it another time, but we have, and I hope that we do someday move forward again with adoption through foster care. But we would never, that person who says, "Oh, okay, well, if the child's born, are you going to adopt them?" That person would never say, "Well, this child's living in poverty. If you're not going to adopt them, you personally, then let's just kill them." Like, that would never be an acceptable argument for a born child. That we don't kill a victim. We don't kill a victim of poverty. We support them. And I think that there is agreement that we need to better support people who are living in awful situations. But the only time that I can think of where we say what we should do for this person who is living in a difficult situation is just kill them. And what's even more sad is, in this case, of a child who's not even born, it's a potential awful situation. We don't know exactly what their life will be like. So to say they may experience food insecurity, they may be in a district with a bad school, let's not solve the food insecurity or the bad school. Let's instead kill that child who may live with those awful situations. I totally agree. No child should be in those situations, but we don't kill a child as the solution to the problem. If that makes sense.
So, yeah, we're gonna end on a different topic, just some light talk, just so we don't end. We're gonna just
So depressing.
But we'll end it with Amy Coney Barrett's comments at the end again. They got cut off at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
So, but we want to thank everybody for listening to our show, for tuning in on Twitter or Spotify or YouTube, or we're now on TikTok as well.
Yeah.
Anyone who can like, subscribe,
can
or
see
share our
everything,
videos, we certainly appreciate it.
Yep.
We're kind of experimenting with different types of strategies. We like making little web documentaries, or at least I do. We like doing the live stream.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Like, if we did how long is the Nuremberg one? 9 minutes? We did one on the Nuremberg trials and what the chief of the EU said, and if she actually was saying we're going to abolish the Nuremberg Code. And I think it's a really good video, but it's 9 minutes. Our recording of it didn't take all that long, but all of the work that Tony did with the research, the scripting, and then the video editing, it's crazy how much work it takes.
Yeah, but we certainly appreciate when you guys do tune in and listen, and that video actually got quite a few views on the various platforms out there.
On YouTube
So,
and on Twitter.
we're gonna keep making those, and so far in Florida things are going pretty good, though, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm really grateful we've met some awesome families, and our kids have been able to play with a few different kids pretty consistently, which is a huge gift, huge answer to
We
prayer.
live right by a great county park. It's called Max Haas Park, and we go there a number of times in the afternoons, late afternoons. But we met some people today. Leona stayed here, but I was playing baseball with the boys, and there's another dad with his 2 boys and a cute little girl, and I think it was his niece and her sister were there playing, and we just talked after, and it turns out now Max is going to play on his team. He's going to coach them because it's the same
It is a
league
baseball
that
team
we're
we had
planning.
already been looking into. Yeah.
Which the season starts February 1st. Tryouts are on January
I didn't know there are
13th.
tryouts.
It's like they just determine like, oh, should
Okay.
be in AA or A.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know. That's pretty
But
legit.
it's just, meeting people is just so key. We only knew a few people in Naples. We know some other people kind of in the Florida area, but
Yeah.
moving someplace where you don't know a lot of people, it's sometimes it's really great, and other times, it's you're like, wow, this is kind of hard, but we just keep pushing through it.
I
It's-
give you a lot of credit.
It was our first,
Awesome job.
last holidays we were gone,
We were in
we were in
California,
California,
last Thanksgiving,
yeah.
Christmas, New Year's,
and now we're here for Thanksgiving
and Halloween.
and Halloween.
All Saints.
So luckily our neighbors invited us over for,
Thanksgiving. That was
what was
super
it,
fun.
pastole con pavo?
Yeah.
Some
Delicious.
turkey surprise. It was
Yep.
good. Mexican food. The boys played tug of war
Yep.
with the neighbor kids, and
It's fun.
but yeah, we miss our friends
Yeah.
and family, but we're making friends here, and we like it here so far.
Yeah.
I'm glad we made the move. It's nice to have 85-degree weather,
It is, yes.
waking up, and
Going to bed, even
we
at
did a
night.
WhatsApp with my sister, and she's like in her house with a hat on and like a jacket on, and they have heat, obviously.
Yeah.
But I just remember it just reminded me how cold it is because they were getting
I
ready
would
to
wear a
leave.
hat so much inside even, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, don't get me wrong. I mean, mostly I just miss the people in Minnesota, but there's very beautiful when there's snow this time of year, and it's cozy to be inside. What I don't miss at all is scraping off cars to drive and then driving on slippery roads.
I don't
Don't
miss
miss that at
looking for mittens and
Oh, no.
boots
That's-
and being outside where you're like, oh my gosh, is my kid's finger gonna fall off? Because it's so cold. But
Yes.
but yeah, we'll put on this Amy Coney video.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching, everybody.
care,
For whoever made it
everyone.
to the end, this was quite a long show.
Yes.
But we'll be coming out
yeah.
with some more web docs soon. So
Take care.
thank you, Twitter. Thank you, Spotify. Thank you, YouTube. All the viewers out there.
Yes.
Let's see, where is this video? Good night,
The blue one.
everybody.
There it is.
Thank you.
The voice of Julie Rickelman
Ms.
from the Center
Rickelman,
for
I have a
Reproductive
question about the
Rights,
safe haven laws.
presenting for the
So
Jackson Women's
petitioner
Health
points
Center.
out that in all 50
And now a
states,
question from
you
Associate
can
Justice
terminate parental
Amy
rights
Coney
by
Barrett.
relinquishing a child after abortion, and I think the shortest period might have been 48 hours, if I'm remembering the data correctly. So it seems to me, seen in that light, both Roe and Casey emphasized the burdens of parenting. And insofar as you and many of your amici focus on the ways in which the forced parenting, forced motherhood would hinder women's access to the workplace and to equal opportunities. It's also focused on the consequences of parenting and the obligations of motherhood that flow from pregnancy. Why don't the safe haven laws take care of that problem? It seems to me that it focuses the burden much more narrowly. There is, without question, an infringement on bodily autonomy, which we have in other contexts like vaccines. However, it doesn't seem to me to follow that pregnancy and then parenthood are all part of the same burden. And so it seems to me that the choice more focused would be between, say, the ability to get an abortion at 23 weeks or the state requiring the woman to go 15, 16 weeks more and then terminate parental rights at the conclusion. Why didn't you address the safe haven laws, and why don't they matter?
I think they don't matter for a couple of reasons, Your Honor. First, even if some of those laws are new since Casey, the idea that a woman could place a child up for adoption has, of course, been true since Roe. So it's a consideration that the court already had before it when it decided those cases and adhered to the viability line. But in addition, we don't just focus on the burdens of parenting, and neither did Roe and Casey. Instead, pregnancy itself is unique. It imposes unique physical demands and risk on women, and in fact has impact on all of their lives, on their ability to care for other children, other family members, on their ability to work. And in particular, in Mississippi, those risks are alarmingly high. It's 75 times more dangerous to give birth in Mississippi than it is to have a pre-viability abortion, and those risks are disproportionately threatening the lives of women of color.
So are you saying, I mean, actually, as I read Roe and Casey, they don't talk very much about adoption. It's a passing reference that means out of the obligations of parenthood. But as I hear this answer, then are you saying that the right, as you conceive of it, is grounded primarily in the bearing of the child and the carrying of pregnancy, and not so much looking forward into the consequences on professional opportunities and work life burdens?
No, Your Honor, I believe it's both, and that is exactly how Casey talked about it. It talked about the two strands of cases that supported the right. One was the strand of cases supporting bodily integrity, and it cited to cases like Cruzan and Riggins versus Nevada. And the second was the strand of cases supporting decisional autonomy, and specifically decisions related to childbearing, marriage, and procreation, decisions like Griswold, Loving. And so it's really both strands that we're relying on here.
May I ask you a question about stare decisis, counsel? Your colleagues on the other side have emphasized that Casey rejected Roe